Firstly, the scholars were exposed as lapdogs of the regime, and as a consequence, they started to defend their positions quite naturally. As blind acceptance of the power of the regime was sort of challenged, especially when shayukh like Salman al-Awda and Safar Hawari started to resist and talk about the kufr of the regime. And especially when Osama wrote this letter to Abdul Aziz ibn Baz, calling attention to the kufr of the House of Saud. And so they started to propagate the view that political and economic knowledge was not a necessary component of the religion. They started to combat an awareness of the circumstances. No longer could religion be used to as an opiate against the Saudi society. They had to come up with a different mechanism. So they said that it was haram to study the circumstances of society at large. And there was a great controversy that, as usual, birthed some very extreme views from both ends of the perspective. So, for example, Ibn Baz, when informed that the people were saying at this time that the ulama had absolutely no knowledge of current affairs and were unable thereby to pass fatwa, Ibn Baz simply said the Muslim has to guard his tongue and he should not speak ill of other Muslims. He should not speak without basira. He should not speak without insight. But he never really addressed the issue and never discussed the agreement between the ulama that is representative of the Saudi relationship in society, that the ulama concentrate on religion and that the House of Saud maintain political and economic spheres. So in this era there was a large highlighting of Fiqh al Wakia and its importance. And it was amidst this era that the work of Nasr Omar, who was a teacher of Sheikh Faisal, and who Sheikh Faisal took the initial lecture from many years ago called Fiqh al Wakia from. He took it from a book by Nasr Omar, which is about a 36-page book in Arabic on the topic of Fiqh al Wakia. And so the book is a short masterpiece in Arabic, and perhaps, inshallah ta'ala, we will translate it soon, bi'idhnillah. But since this time, there has been a general awakening in this era of study. Many Muslims are more familiar with the importance of this area, and we continue to grow as an ummah along these lines. However, Ya Muslimin, we are still far away from the type of developments in this area which are necessary if we are to emancipate ourselves from the oppression of the Taghut systems that dominate us today. We have effective alterations today and we're going in a proper direction, but this discussion with you here today is to get you to contribute further to the awakening of the Muslim Ummah by understanding the deep complexities that necessitate true fiqh, true understanding of the religion, inshaAllah ta'ala. Look, for example, at the awakening occurring in the countries. There, people are really fighting in the way of Allah to establish complete Islam in the earth. Look at the efforts by the Shabab to understand the reality in which they exist in, which has produced such fruits as their ability to throw out the international, transnational food development agencies, identifying them properly as a source of domination, as a source of subsidy for Western farmers, and to grow and to become independent under agricultural standards. Why? Because they have Fiqh al Wakia defined by principles that are included and referred back to the deen. And look at efforts to create and utilize technology like the internet to continue to convey to the ummah from those who are on the front lines of the war against the kafirin that it is propaganda what is being spouted about them being terrorists, and the crafty utilization of such media, what they like to term jihadi media, etc., etc., displaying an understanding of Fiqh al Wakia that allows them to combat the plans and the plots of the planners that plot against al-Islam. And just look generally at the utilization of the internet as a tool for dawah to spread information about the events as they are affecting the Muslim ummah, to create an aware and a conscious ummah, and know that these are derivatives of the ummah going back to understanding a deeper comprehension of what it means to be aware of the circumstances, to be aware of the religion by understanding its existence in reality. The Taliban are another example in Afghanistan. The development of this movement has really advanced from a practical perspective. When they first came to power, the Taliban movement was against technology. They were against modernization to a degree. They were against the utilization of internet, and at one point, with the invasion of the Americans and the lessons learned, quite a few alterations have been made to the point that what we see coming out of the Taliban movement now is perhaps some of the best interpretation of the environment, some of the best ability to refute the propaganda of the kuffar, to advance developmental plans for the state, to use the radio, to use communication, to describe the reality to the people so that people are not deceived any longer by the lies and the slander of satanic media outlets, to fight them like they fight you. This is all derived from our ability as an ummah to re-enter the field of Fiqh al Wakia. So Sheikh Nasruddin Albani discussed this topic amidst all of this confusion in the 1991 to 2000 era. After some of the emotions had settled down with regard to it, for verily Sheikh Nasr Omar went to prison for his stance about the Saudi regime and the occupation forces of America being in the kingdom, and also for his stance with regard to resurrecting the science. And when Sheikh Albani was asked about those that talk about Fiqh al Wakia, he said that during the turmoil, talking about the U.S. occupation of Saudi Arabia, there were some people who brought up the issue which is called Fiqh al Wakia. I do not disagree in principle with this concept, he says, for which they came up with this name of Fiqh al Wakia, because many of the scholars stated clearly that those who lead the ummah and give answers to solve its problems should have knowledge and understanding of circumstances and realities. So the ruling of a thing is a projection of one's understanding of it. And that cannot be achieved, the Shaykh says, except by understanding the circumstances surrounding the issue for which they have to give an answer. This is one of the bases of giving rulings and fatwas in particular, and is one of the principles of knowledge in general. So Fiqh al Waqi means understanding what concerns the Muslims with regard to their own affairs or the plots of their enemies, so as to warn them or help them to progress in a real sense, and not just in theory, when focusing on news of the kuffar or focusing totally on their analysis and ideas. And then he ends by discussing the fact that we see many people confused by this term Fiqh al Waqi, that they've divided into two extremes: people that only accept an analysis and an understanding of current events, and people that shun analysis and current events and current conditions of the Muslims and analysis thereof altogether, as is usually the case. So he ends his statement on Fiqh al Waqi by saying that it is required for those who have devoted themselves to knowing the reality of the Muslim Ummah and the plots that are made against it, for them to cooperate with the scholars of Quran and Sunnah according to the way of the early generations of this Ummah, so that the former may present their understanding and ideas, and the latter may issue the Islamic ruling on them based on sound evidence and proof. And indeed, Ya Muslimin, this is the way that a true Islamic situation should exist in the world. And because we do not have a society in which we can come up with Islamic solutions to our problems and present them for clearance from amongst the learned, who we can trust to defend the deen, we have fracture, we have disintegration of the ability to implement Islam in its totality throughout the land. And so we agree that this is the situation, and that it is best for us to remain not on extremes, but to remain in the middle path in this topic. Usually you find all topics leading you to this point. And we say that it is of utmost importance as this ummah progresses with events that are happening recently to take these principles into consideration and to try to understand the circumstances in which we live comprehensively, so that we can derive proper understandings, and so that the ulama can give us proper understanding, proper advice in a day and age where everything is upside down and all seems strange. Today we see there is absolutely no recognition of Fiqh al Waqi. especially in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where the root of intellectual endeavors of this ummah usually occurs. Take the Saudi ulama's recent criticism of the protests in the Muslim world, shunning them as anti-Islamic, but shunning them in a way that said nothing about the cause of the protests, about the oppression, neglecting to mention the fact that all of these rulers that are being rebelled against, they're not even in the fold of Islam, for they have clearly left the deen of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but they don't mention a word about the oppression. They want to blame the protesters, showing that they are obviously on the payroll or working for the regimes. This is not about independent thought or an ability to interpret reality. It is about defending what is in their own interests. The cementation of the House of Saud, probably the most plunderous rapists of the Muslims in this ummah today. And this is exactly like times that went by when the ummah fell into intellectual decline and as a consequence suffered from being invaded and conquered. And it reminds us of the era of the Tatars when Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala made his famous fatwa against the Tatars who declared Islam with their tongues. And when he declared takfir and the mandatory obligation to fight them until all the religion was for Allah, he was asked about this. He was asked about fighting people that said with their tongue the Shahada. And he answered that it was obligatory to fight them on the clear basis of the book of Allah and the Sunnah of His Messenger and the ijma' of the Imams of the Muslims. And he said that it was based on two principles. Firstly, a knowledge of their reality, a knowledge of their situation, and knowledge of the rulings of Allah concerning people like them. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala said with regard to the first principle, everyone who is in contact with these people knows their situation. The one who is not in contact with them will only know that from what he hears of authentic reports. So he will hear that they say they are Muslims. But someone who is in contact with them, he will explain about their situation after explaining the other principle, knowledge of which is limited to people who have knowledge of Islamic Sharia. So we say that every group that rejects one of the tangible, practical laws of Sharia that are proven on the basis of tawatur must be fought. Anything that is mutawatir, agreed upon as a principle, like riba is haram, like the legislations of Islam need to be implemented in its totality, that anything that is proven on the basis of Islam, on the face of Islam, anybody that goes against this, then he has left Islam according to the consensus, the ijma' of all the Muslims. And so this is a clear proof of the necessity of understanding the situation of the Tatars. For if Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala did not understand their condition, who they were, what laws they legislated, how they behaved, what they did, then he could not make the takfir that would have otherwise condemned the Muslims to be conquered and dominated, giving them an inability to defend themselves for the basis that they said shahada with their tongues. And today we exist in quite the similar manner, where we're told not to rebel against the rulers who are collaborating with the kuffar in waging a war against the Muslimin. So Fiqh al Wakia is a most important component of understanding the deen. And Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala emphasized the necessity of including knowledge of the situation again when he talked about legislating on jihad, when he said in the matters pertaining to jihad, it is obligatory to take the opinions of the people of correct deen, those who are experienced with that which is affecting the men in their daily lives, and not those who look at the superficial aspects of the religion. Their opinions should not be looked at, nor the opinions of those people of the deen who do not have any experience in the worldly affairs. And so we say as well that when analyzing the conditions of the Muslims, we may see theoretical steps in a positive direction, but practically with regard to ruling, governing, and understanding the nature of the kufr that dominates in the land today, we are lacking, ya Muslimin.